have a pretty good probability, as you see in this right-hand column, of returning a positive profit. And so let's just talk about one of the characteristics that Dr. Raper mentioned. Excuse me. There we go. And that is, the impact of calf price based on the market trend. And we're gonna focus on a spring calving operation here today. And so we'll assume that those calves are weaned in October. And I'd just like to point out that, so the blue line is the lighter calves at 475. The red line is the 575-pound weight class. And in this long-term slide, or the averages for price of calves, you can see that there's a pretty significant positive market trend in those lighter weight classes. When you get into the heavier steers at 675 in the black line, it's more of a sideways trend, and then a downward trend in the really big steers at 775. So, there's no question that on average, the lighter calves are going to have a decent chance of increasing over time. And so that's one thing to consider. If you've got really big weaning weights, or if you weaned early and your calves have gained a lot, you might consider that, there's going to be a lower possibility or probability of those calves increasing in price. It'll be interesting to see what Bill Barnard has to say about this and several of the other characteristics we're going to talk about here next week. So what I wanted to do in the presentation here today is just kind of show you some of the case study results that we have documented in a number of these projects several years ago. I tell you what, we learned quite a bit by doing those case studies, and I know the livestock markets see this all the time with feedback from their customers, where, on occasion we'd have a case study where the producer just absolutely hit it out of the park. Calves gained well, their feed costs were moderate to low. There was very little shrink, the market worked in their favor, so on and so forth, and all of those things added up to a preconditioning enterprise positive return of, $60, $70, $80 a head. On the other hand, we've also discovered through these case study projects that, boy, there are a lot of things to consider, and frankly, there are a lot of ways to screw this up, if you want to think about it this way. But anyway, so what we thought we'd do is point some of those things, some of those characteristics out, and just give you some kind of a heads up if you don't have a lot of familiarity with managing calves post-weaning, and particularly with marketing. And your livestock marketing expert or professional can help you with some of these things, like the shrink, for example, and the market trend, perhaps, and so on. So this is a picture of a case study we did in Canadian County. Bob LaValle was the area livestock specialist at the time, and as I recall, there were about 30 cows in this project, and we weaned half of those calves, and the other half stayed on the cows until the day of the special sale. And we worked with Brad Tipton in that project. This is another case study that was a pretty large effort there in Muskogee County. And in this case, we had a large seed stock producer approach us, and our area specialist, the county educator, and our state extension team, and he said, you know what, I've got really a nice set of facilities. I've got several neighbors that would like to be involved in this Oklahoma Quality Beef Network Back 45 program. I would be willing to receive those calves at my place. I've got a lot of hay harvested. We'll feed those calves hay, and we'll feed a supplement. We'll charge a little bit of yardage, the feed cost, and then treat any calves that get sick. and perhaps that'll allow some of these producers that don't have the desire, the skill, maybe the knowledge, but yet would like to precondition their calves and possibly take advantage of that market premium. So these are kind of the summary of the results of that project. We wound up with 12 other producers taking calves to this central location. They were not all delivered at the same time. As you can see here, the days from weaning to the actual, or days from delivery to the actual sale date ranged from 45 days up to 60 days. They were all sold on the same day. It's interesting, we had one producer that brought 217 head to take advantage of that opportunity, and then we had smaller groups of 5 and 9 head. Mostly what I wanted to show you in this case study is the pretty dramatic range in calves that had to be treated for respiratory illness. And you know, for example, here's one producer with 24 calves delivered. 8 of those calves had to be treated, and 1 of those calves died. And so that's a pretty, you know, that's really a pretty devastating event, and it was costly for that producer. I mean, if you do the math, that's a 4% death loss, and so that really hurt. On the other hand, there were a lot of producers. You see a lot of zeros in that column. This is a case with this producer where, you know, we'd hope that we could get the veterinarian and that producer back together and say, look, what can we do better next year? That's what a network is all about, sharing information and try to make some improvements. But on the other hand, a lot of cases where there's no treatments for sickness, and our death loss overall was very low with only that one animal out of 512 calves. Here's the producer that brought 217 calves, and only 2 of those calves had to be treated for sickness. So very successful overall, only a 4% treatment rate, which is very low. And I suspect, Dr. Biggs, Dr. Whitworth, you might want to comment on this later, but I suspect that if we were to do this on 12 operations and leave those calves at their origin or at their home farm and precondition them there, I suspect that you could even get lower than that 4% treatment loss. But the other point I think with this case study is that, as Dr. Biggs mentioned, just because you precondition those calves, you give them their vaccines, you do all the right things with the cow herd prior to them even calving, there's a possibility, there is a risk of sickness, and you just have to be prepared and have a plan for that. Here you can see in this case study the in weight, the out weight on these calves, and each producer's average daily gain. The last thing I'll point out with this particular case study is there's a pretty darn dramatic range in performance of these cattle at this central location. Again, they all had the same ration and pretty dramatic. So, you know, many things could go into that. Predicting performance on these programs is going to be difficult. We can kind of give you a good estimate based on the nutritional program and the background of the calves. A lot of it is going to depend on forage quality. And we see quite a bit of variation based on that trait alone. Okay, so here's, this is a case study. We worked with Jack Wallace, and I think Jack is on the call here today. Jack, feel free to step in if you want to comment on that. But I just wanted to show you another situation where we ran into an issue. Here you've got initial ranch weight, and the control calves were similar to the Canadian County case study. The control calves were left on the cow during the preconditioning period. The network calves were weaned about approximately 45 to 50 days ahead of the special sale. Here's the final ranch weight, 1.6 and 1.9, but that's net gain. But you can see here what happened is the shrink on the network calves reached up and caused a big problem. At 39 pounds of shrink, wound up being calculated a 6% shrink on those calves. And so, we look back on that, we saw the mistakes that we made, recognized those, and obviously that producer, our county educator, myself, learned a really good lesson. Every producer is going to do, it's their cattle, they're going to make the decisions, but certainly with those experiences, and I'd encourage people to most definitely work with your livestock marketing expert, whether that's the livestock market owner or manager, or if you're working with a superior rep or video auction or other marketing person. Those folks have a lot of experience managing these situations, and they can help steer you out of situations like this where you just, in fact, this shrink basically removed any opportunity for these folks to make any money for the preconditioning enterprise. Okay, then here's another case study. This was also a Canadian County project. And in this case, the producer weaned the calves early. He put out a self-feeder for these cattle. And so basically, I think two things happen. Let's see, let's launch why don't we launch the poll question, Jeff or Paul? And I want you to tell me what you think about these cattle in terms of their fleshiness. You'll have to go down and select, click on that down arrow and select the break-even poll number 1. These are the questions for the earlier polls. There we go. Okay, so how do you rate those calves in that picture for fleshing ability? You think they're thin, average, or fleshy? Obviously, I've probably already given my opinion away, but I just wanted you to think about that, have a kind of a picture in your mind of what that might look like. These calves gained pretty well, and they were on a self-feeder. So this producer wound up with two pretty big issues. And one was he had a flesh discount when these calves were marketed, and then he also had a really big feed bill. And so we didn't make money in this case study either in the preconditioning enterprise. And yep, looks like most everybody selected the fleshy category, and that's certainly what the cattle buyers, how they rated those cattle on that day. 72% of the participants here today has got them rated as fleshy, and I would definitely agree. Okay, so with those things in mind, I'm gonna change my screen and we'll just play with this little Excel spreadsheet program. And then hopefully you'll be thinking of some questions or comments you might have related to some of these entries that we're gonna include in here. I've already got one situation set up. The scenario I've got in here is 575-pound steers, and I'm going to start out with 3% shrink, and this would be the control calves or calves that you market from a traditional standpoint right at weaning, let's say sometime there in early October. We've got 3% shrink in some of those case studies we did earlier where we'd weigh the calves right before they left the ranch headed to the livestock market. I've got two case studies where the calves actually gained just a little bit of weight, but we've got more case studies where there's 3, 4, 5%. I've got one case study where there was a case of 11% shrink. And in that case, those calves were brought in early in the morning, sorted and kind of mauled around until late morning, and then hauled to the livestock market. they weren't actually, they didn't have their pay weight determined. It didn't go through the ring until later on that day. And so, you know, that's just a matter of being aware of that, whether you're involved in a value enhancement program, a VAC 45 program or not, and kind of managing that shrink. And all I know to tell you is just to work closely with your livestock marketing professional to assist you with that. That makes the sale weight at 3% shrink, 558. I've got them in last week's market on that weighted calf was about $1.55 in the number 1 category. So then if we compare that to a 55-day long preconditioning program where we're going to send these cattle to a market where there's going to be a large number of these cattle available for sale so that we can maximize our opportunity perhaps to receive one of those preconditioning premiums. Average daily gain in this scenario, I'm going to use Dr. Beck's scenario from last week. I've got these, we're going to assume that these calves are both implanted and the producer is using an ionophore in the feeding program, and the mineral or the mineral supplement, if you will, is also incorporated in the commercial feed product that the producer purchases. All right, at 2 pounds a day gain, 55 days, that makes these calves weigh 685 on the ranch. Now, you know, here I'm gonna include a 1% weight. Again, I encourage you, all of us, to ask Bill Barnhart next week. His experience with shrink on these preconditioned calves. There are not very many people in the country that have more experience than he does. But I tell you what, he has gotten pretty masterful, and a lot of these livestock market owners are masterful at helping you manage this. You know, if you walk into a sale barn on a day when all preconditioned calves are being sold, what do you hear? Hopefully silence, right? It's quiet. Those calves aren't worried about where mother is. They're not as stressed. They are in a new place, but they're not as stressed because they don't have all those things to deal with at the same time. So I've got them in here at 1% shrink. I think Bill would tell you that he's had lots of cases. Maybe it's the routine that those calves actually gain a little bit of weight if they're managed well. Okay, so this is our opportunity in this spreadsheet to address that market trend. I'm going to leave it at 0 for this budget because we're dealing with 685-pound calves. And remember, in Dr. Raper's market trend slide, those heavier calves generally move sideways, maybe just a slight decline in the market over that time period. So right now, I'm going to leave it there. You'd want to put your own number in there, whatever you predict, or you and your livestock market professional, or maybe Dr. Darrell Peel or somebody predicts. But the point is, you know, obviously in any of these entries, you need to use your own values. Okay, so then I'm going to put kind of a standard slide in here. So with these two cells here, we're separating the issues of the influence of increasing calf weight on a given day. Okay, that is what we think of a value of additional weight. And then we're separating that from the issue of changing cattle price in the market over time. Those are two different things. And so you can kind of deal with those separately with this approach. Okay, now here for the producer that I mentioned earlier, we might put in a $3 to $4 per hundredweight discount for flesh. I looked on last week's weighted average Oklahoma livestock marketing report, and there were 2 cases where there were fleshy heifers listed in that market report, and both of those had an $8 to $10 per hundredweight discount for fleshiness. So it can be very substantial. I think Dr. Raper said most of the documented or the average documented price range from about $2 to $3.50 for cattle that were classified as fleshy. Dr. Raper's average Oklahoma Quality Beef Network VAC 45 premium has been around $12. Last year, as I recall, the average premium for the heavier class of cattle, these 6-weight cattle, was about $10 per hundredweight. I'm gonna be conservative and put our premium in for now at $8 a hundredweight. Okay, after all that adjustment, that gives us a $1.51 price, $1,024 gross revenue for these calves. Now let's talk about our expenses. Okay, so we got an opportunity cost. Of course, you can set that at 0 if you don't want to consider an opportunity cost for owning those cattle longer. I'm going to go ahead and include, Dr. Raper said she thought a 5% interest rate was fair, reasonably close. Obviously, you need to change that to represent your own. Health supplies and medicine, Dr. Biggs shared some of those kind of guidelines a couple of weeks ago with this. Let me just hover over this and that'll show you what I've got in there. I've got, let's say you choose option number 1 and you vaccinate your calves at branding and again at weaning, you're going to have 2 rounds of a modified live product. We're going to assume they're going to cost about $2.50 each. I'm only charging my preconditioning enterprise here for 1 round of a clostridial vaccine, simply because I think most producers, not all, but most producers already would routinely vaccinate their calves for, quote, blackleg or a clostridial product at branding time. So I've just charged the enterprise for 1 round. And then a wormer, 1 round of a wormer at weaning time, and then an implant also at weaning time at about $1.50. For the moment, I've got no death loss in here. Labor, the way I calculated labor is I just assumed we're going to average about an hour a day to work with these calves, including processing, and 55 days. So I included 55 hours worth of labor and assumed I was going to maybe hire my teenage son to help feed these or pay myself about $12 an hour. Obviously, you know, you may think your time is worth $20 an hour, or maybe hire your nephew for $8 an hour. But anyway, I've got it in here at $13.20. Equipment, this is a really tough one, I think, because, you know, gosh, it could get extremely complicated. If, for example, if you have to include some depreciation on a pickup, you have to drive 5 miles to feed these calves every day for 55 days, you know, you might want to consider a little bit of depreciation on that. I just included some small things that have relatively short useful life, like feed bunks. I included the cost of 1 feed bunk, divided it by 50 calves, and assumed I'm going to replace 1 feed bunk each year. I think I also included the cost of a pistol grip syringe and assumed I was going to be able to use that for 3 years. Let's see. All right, then my nutrition budget. This is basically Dr. Beck's budget from last week with 6.2 pounds of feed with an honor for an implant. That's the program with 6.2 pounds of feed, free choice, high quality Bermuda grass hay. He was getting about 2 pounds a day weight gain. So I've got these calves in at $90 a ton for the Bermuda grass hay, consuming 13 pounds of hay, 6.2 pounds of feed times 55 days. $235 a ton was Dr. Beck's feed cost, and that's 11 cents, 11.75 cents per pound of feed. I just assumed we're going to put out some white salt, and they won't eat 2 ounces of white salt, or they shouldn't, but that's what I've calculated here, and of course that doesn't cost very much. I've got the cost of a program tag in here, and then also included a little bit of additional marketing costs. Now, again, you'll want to visit with your livestock market professional to find out what that number is going to be. Sometimes you'll just be dealing with their standard commission. On occasion, if this is a special sale, let's say they don't normally have a sale on a Saturday, but they're going to put together a sale and have 1,000 to 1,500 head of preconditioned calves, they might charge a little bit of additional commission on that day, simply because they have to round their crew up and you know, have a sale on a day that they normally don't. Okay, so then you can see our total gross revenue here, increased revenue, less the preconditioning cost of $115. In this situation, we're going to wind up with about a $44 net profit in the preconditioning enterprise. And if you look down here, that's from 120 pounds of weight gain. Our total cost of gain is 95 cents. Our feed cost of gain is 61 cents. So pretty close. I think Dr. Beck had it calculated at 62 cents. Value of weight gain is $1.32. Now, yes, that includes this $8 program premium over here. So let's just take that out and put it back to zero. And what that tells you is that with our 10-cent slide and these calves gaining 120 pounds, basically we're assuming that the value of weight gain over time is worth about 87 cents. Okay, so another way to look at that is that if we go back over here and one of the first questions Dr. Biggs asked was, what would you be willing to accept from a premium standpoint in order to go through these value enhancement steps for a certified program? The most common answer to that question there 2 weeks ago was $8 per hundredweight. Maybe that was Dr. Raper. Anyway, it was $8, but let's just see if we're just going to pay ourselves for labor up here. Let's see what it takes. There's $2, and we're still making a little bit of money. So at about $1.50, we're paying ourselves $12 an hour for labor and still breaking even. Now, granted, you know, I understand that for a lot of people that still wouldn't be enough because, you know, perhaps you don't have the labor resources, perhaps you're going to have to, you know, utilize part of your facilities that you could otherwise be using for something else, so on and so forth. But anyway, on average, the premium last year for the 600 pound class of cattle was $10 a hundredweight, and that gets us up to about a $58 profit. Okay, any questions at this point? We're getting pretty close. Let me, close to time. Let me, I'm going to unhide a couple of columns here, and I just wanted to quickly go through an alternate example where we've got, the only thing I've changed here is the rate of weight gain. So here I'm going to use the stockpile fertilized Bermuda grass scenario instead of feeding hay in a dry lot. Okay, so we've done a lot of research over the years on stockpiling Bermuda grass, and it works really well. Obviously, it's very dependent on late summer precipitation. But if you happen to get kind of that normal bump in rainfall there in late August and early September, you can grow some nice quality forage, and it works really well for a program preconditioning enterprise. I've just assumed these calves are going to gain 1.6 pounds a day, but over here in my feed budget, notice I've included about 100 pounds worth of urea, and I'm going to assume that it's going to take about 1.5 acres to graze these calves for 55 days, and that assumes that we're going to grow about another 1,500 pounds of regrowth, high-quality stockpiled forage. I'm going to pay myself a little bit for using that pasture for those 2 months, pay the fertilizer bill. Then I've got the supplementation program. I dropped it down to the 3 pounds a day instead of 6.2 pounds a day. Okay, same salt, same cost there. Now my program costs $99, or I'm sorry, program costs $140. Or $191, excuse me, instead of the $115. Calves are only gaining 99 cents, but look what happened to my feed cost of gain. probably should reduce the labor amount as well if they're going to be turned out on pasture and you're not having to feed hay there in a dry lot. But anyway, that makes a pretty significant improvement in that program. Let's see, or pretty significant reduction in my feed cost. So we could play around with this for a long time. You know, if you just want to see what happens when you have a kind of a shrink problem. So if those calves shrink 6%, you know, it wipes out a lot of that opportunity. And I'm just wanted to make sure that point that out, make sure that everybody considers, you know, best ways to manage through some of those issues. The death loss, obviously, it doesn't take a whole lot of death loss, especially with a small number of calves and so on. Let me just stop there and ask if there are questions or comments. Jeff, I'll just kind of let you take over and see if anybody's got any comments or questions.
Okay, we had a question earlier. They want to know what time of year that Muskogee study was done.
That was done in the fall.
Same time.
Those cattle were, let's see, they were brought in late September, early October, and they were marketed at an OQBN sale in early December.
We've got a question. I'm not sure. How to go in there and unmute them.
I was wondering if you have a natural program to sell the kids, or have you ever been approached about that?
I had a little trouble hearing the question, but I think the question was, have we been approached and considered like natural certification, an all natural certification? Is that correct? And
yes, I was wondering if you had a natural program to at this sale that you're talking about, where we could bring in natural cattle, which
gotcha.
would be even a bigger premium.
Jeff, do you want to tackle that? I mean, I think the answer is we have not done that, but Jeff, Dr. Beck, Dr. Raper, you all want to comment on that?
Well, it's not part of our program. If you were to enroll in our program, it would definitely be something that would be added to basically your profile that we give to the livestock marketer to let them know that everything that your cattle have gone through certifications wise. But we don't have that as part of our program now.
Yeah, in fact, we'd have to get it approved for certification before we could offer it as a formal all natural program.
Right. If I could just pop in for a second. Those premiums for the natural calves, if you're not in a program that is certified natural, they're typically just not there, because that chain of ownership or chain of management isn't there to go with the calf in a certified way. So I just tossed that in.
Yeah, that's good.
The preconditioning premiums are still there. It's the natural premium that likely wouldn't be there.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you very much. I agree with the lady that just spoke. We are third-party verified through IMI Global, and we're looking for alternative markets. So that was my question, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Dave, you had a extra $1 on medicine on your alternate program. Any reason there?
The reason is I didn't notice I had an extra $1. No reason, Brian. I kind of played around with those health costs. You know, we were kicking around yesterday whether we should charge ourselves for $1 for, let's say, buying a castration band. And then we decided not to because we thought most of the producers that are more progressive are castrating their calves at either at birth or at branding time. So we took it back off, and then we had the question about whether to charge for 1 or 2 clostridiols and so on. So no good reason. Well, Jeff, the bottom line is we're happy to make this spreadsheet available to you. The last few days, we've made some updates to it. We're more than happy to email that to you, or you can jump on beef.okstate.edu. We'll put this updated version on there in the next day or two. Feel free to download it. It's free. Put your own numbers in there and, evaluate that situation, and maybe they'll help you make an informed decision. Hey, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Lalman. If you have not joined us in previous weeks on our webinar series, you can also go to beef.okstate.edu and view the previous webinar series if you've missed any of those. Next week, we will have 2 speakers. We will have Bill Barnhart from OKC West Livestock Market and David Cantrell, County Extension Educator and also participant in the OQBN program. Bill will discuss perspectives from a livestock marketer and buyer, and David will discuss his perspectives from a seller's point of view. So we hope you will join us again next week, same time, same place. If there are no further questions, that will conclude this week's webinar series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great job, Jeff.